The first thing people noticed when Walter Boone walked into that courtroom wasn't the grease on his coveralls. It was the smell. Burnt oil, gasoline, metal dust, and the kind of smell that sticks to a man after 30 years under broken engines. One woman near the back actually covered her nose and whispered, "Lord, somebody open a window." A few people laughed under their breath, and Walter heard every single one of them. Funny thing is, he didn't look embarrassed at all. Tired maybe, a little worn down, but not embarrassed. He just kept walking slowly toward the defense table, carrying an old dented lunchbox in one hand like he'd just clocked out of work and accidentally wandered into the wrong building. And, honestly, maybe that's exactly what everybody in that room thought he was. Just some old mechanic about to get steamrolled by people with more money, cleaner suits, and better lawyers. But the thing nobody in that courtroom understood yet was this. Men like Walter Boone don't survive 30 years in a dying steel town unless they've learned exactly when to stay quiet and exactly when to let people bury themselves. Now, if you'd driven through Ash Creek, how 10 years ago, you probably would have missed Boone's auto entirely. It sat behind an old bait shop near the railroad tracks. Half the sign burned out. Gravel parking lot full of rusted pickups and tired-looking sedans that somehow kept running because Walter refused to let people get stranded if he could help it. He wasn't one of those mechanics who talked fast and threw fake problems at customers. Actually, half the time he'd fix things for free and make people swear not to tell anybody. Single moms, old veterans, broke kids trying to get to community college. Didn't matter. If Walter thought you were genuinely trying your best, he'd help you out. That's probably why folks around Ash Creek trusted him more than they trusted their own family sometimes. My Uncle Ray used to say, "If Walter tells you your engine's dying, go say goodbye to the damn thing." That's how honest the man was. But honesty doesn't really stand much of a chance once big money decides you're standing in the way. About 4 years before that courtroom mess, a company called Velocity Automotive rolled into town and changed everything. They built this giant luxury dealership right off Highway 9 where the old lumber mill used to be. Glass walls, polished marble floors, espresso bar inside the lobby. Hell, they even had scented air vents pumping cinnamon through the building around Christmas. And the owner, Travis Mercer, loved attention almost as much as he loved money. Travis wasn't from Ash Creek. He came from Scottsdale or somewhere like that and treated the town like a business experiment. You know the type: expensive haircut, fake smile, always calling people buddy while figuring out how to squeeze another dollar out of them. At first, Walter didn't care. Said people could spend their money wherever they wanted. Problem was, Velocity couldn't stand the fact that half the town still trusted some old grease-covered mechanic over their shiny corporate service center. Travis took that personally. And once his numbers started slipping, things got ugly fast. Suddenly, Boone's auto started getting flooded with one-star reviews online from accounts nobody recognized. Health inspectors started showing up over nonsense complaints. One week, they cited Walter because a mop bucket wasn't labeled correctly. Another time, somebody anonymously reported him for unsafe disposal practices because there was oil near a drain behind the garage after a thunderstorm. It was constant. Little things, just enough to wear a man down. Then, customers started disappearing. Walter would notice people he'd known 20 years suddenly avoiding eye contact at the grocery store. Turns out, Velocity had been offering free oil changes to anyone willing to leave bad reviews about local competitors. And the worst part was, it was working. One night, I remember Walter sitting outside his garage after closing, drinking stale coffee from a paper cup while staring at the empty lot. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor, like something inside him was slowly giving out. He rubbed his hands together for a second and laughed quietly to himself. Said, "You spend your whole life trying to build a good name, and nowadays some idiot with Wi-Fi can destroy it before lunch." Then about 2 months later, the car showed up. Black Aston Martin, custom rims, spotless paint, probably worth more than Walter made in 3 years. Everybody noticed it because cars like that didn't belong anywhere near Ash Creek. The driver was this young guy named Dylan Mercer, Travis Mercer's son. Mid-20s, expensive watch, haircut sharp enough to cut glass, acting friendly in that fake rich kid way where you can feel the disrespect hiding underneath every smile. He walked into Boone's auto wearing designer sneakers that probably cost more than Walter's toolbox and said, "You the owner?" Walter nodded once. Dylan looked around the garage like he was touring a zoo exhibit. Then he smiled and tossed Walter the keys. "Need a quick tune-up." Heard you're the miracle worker around here. Walter caught the keys without saying much. But later he admitted something about that kid bothered him immediately. Not what he said. The way he said it. Like he already knew how the story was going to end. Walter worked on the Aston Martin for less than a day. Basic tune-up, fluid check, swapped out a worn ignition coil. Nothing major. Even knocked a couple $100 off the bill because he figured the kid was probably getting overcharged his whole life by dealership mechanics who saw dollar signs every time rich customers walked in. That's just who Walter was. Didn't matter if you drove a rusted Ford Ranger or a six-figure sports car. He treated the work the same. Dylan picked the car up right before closing and barely even looked at the invoice. Just smirked, slid his sunglasses on, and said, "Appreciate it, old man." Then he peeled out of the lot hard enough to kick gravel across the garage doors. Walter stood there watching the taillights disappear down the road, and for the first time in years, he got that feeling in his gut mechanics learned to trust. Same feeling doctors probably get when something looks fine on paper but doesn't sit right in their bones. 3 weeks later, Walter got served with court papers while replacing brakes on a mail truck. Deputy walked into the garage looking uncomfortable as hell, handed him the envelope, and wouldn't even make eye contact afterward. Lawsuit claimed Walter had intentionally installed unauthorized aftermarket parts that caused catastrophic damage to Dylan Mercer's vehicle. Total damages requested, $180,000. Walter read the number 3 times, like maybe he'd misunderstood it. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes when life punches you hard enough, your brain doesn't know what else to do. But things stopped being funny real quick. Local news picked the story up within days. Velocity Automotive practically turned it into a marketing campaign. Protect your investment. Trust certified professionals. That slogan ended up on billboards all over town with shiny photos of Travis Mercer shaking hands beside luxury cars. Meanwhile, Walter's reputation got dragged through the mud every night on Facebook. People who'd never even met him suddenly became experts on what kind of mechanic he was. One comment said, "Knew that dump would screw somebody over eventually." Another wrote, "Some people belong in junkyards, not touching luxury imports." And here's the ugly truth nobody likes admitting. Public opinion usually sides with whoever looks successful. Travis Mercer looked successful. Walter looked like a man who spent half his life crawling under trucks. By the time the trial date arrived, Boone's Auto was barely hanging on. Walter had sold 2 of his backup lifts just to keep paying legal filing fees. His niece Rachel begged him to hire an attorney, but Walter refused. Said every decent lawyer in Ash Creek either worked for Mercer already or was too scared to go against him. So instead, Walter started digging on his own, quietly, patiently, like a mechanic tracing a hidden engine knock nobody else can hear. Turns out when you've spent decades listening more than talking, people eventually trust you with things they don't tell anybody else. One of those people was a bartender named Sheila Grady. She worked evenings at a place called Rusty's Tavern, right outside town where half the dealership employees drank after work. About a week before trial, Sheila called Walter close to midnight and said, "You need to come down here, right now." Walter drove over still wearing his work gloves. Sheila met him outside near the dumpsters looking nervous. She lit a cigarette with shaking hands and said, "I heard something you need to hear." Apparently Dylan Mercer had been bragging while drunk a few nights earlier, loud enough half the bar could hear him, talking about how his father was finally going to wipe that dinosaur mechanic off the map. Walter asked if anybody else heard it. Sheila nodded slowly. "More than a few." And then she looked him dead in the eye and said something Walter never forgot. "People are scared of your kind disappearing, Walt. Folks like Mercer, they make everything expensive, polished, fake. You remind people this town used to have a soul." That hit him harder than the lawsuit, honestly, because deep down Walter already knew it was true. Ash Creek wasn't really fighting over car repairs anymore. It was fighting over what kind of town it wanted to become. A place where regular people still mattered, or a place where money decided whose voice counted. A couple days later, another break came from somewhere Walter never expected. Teenager named Eli Benson showed up at the garage carrying a cracked cell phone with spider webs across the screen. Kid looked terrified just standing there. Turns out, Eli worked part-time cleaning cars at Velocity Automotive. Barely 17 years old, he kept glancing over his shoulder like somebody might be following him. Finally, he handed Walter the phone and whispered, "I think you should see this before they delete it." Video footage showed Dylan Mercer inside the dealership garage 2 nights after picking up the Aston Martin from Boone's Auto. The timestamp was clear, Dylan and another employee were underneath the car loosening engine mount bolts while laughing about making Daddy proud. Walter watched the clip twice without saying a word. Ely swallowed hard and said, "I didn't know they were going to sue you. I swear." Walter looked at the kid for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You did the right thing coming here." But the real twist came the night before court. Walter was sitting alone in the garage after midnight when Rachel walked in carrying an old cigar box. Said she'd found it buried in storage while looking for business records. Inside were dozens of old photographs, receipts, handwritten thank you cards, 30 years of people Walter had helped. Veterans, teachers, farmers, families. One photo stopped Walter cold. Travis Mercer himself standing beside a rusted pickup nearly 20 years earlier, back before he got rich. Younger, skinnier, holding the shoulder of an older man with grease-covered hands. Walter recognized him instantly. Travis's father. See? Years before Velocity existed, Travis's dad used to bring trucks into Boone's Auto constantly. Good man by all accounts. Honest. Hard-working. Walter once rebuilt the man's transmission for almost nothing after a bad winter nearly bankrupted the family business. And according to the handwritten note folded behind the photo, Travis had been there that day. Just a teenager watching his father shake Walter's hand and say, "Someday I'll pay you back for this." Walter stared at that photo for a long time, then quietly said something that almost broke Rachel's heart. "Maybe he thought this was paying me back." Morning of the trial, Ash Creek Courthouse looked more like a circus than a legal proceeding. News vans outside, people crowding the steps. Half the town showed up because by then the case wasn't really about Walter Boone anymore. It had become entertainment. Social media loved it. Rich dealership versus dirty mechanic. David and Goliath. If David forgot how lawsuits work. When Walter walked through those courthouse doors in his oil-stained work coveralls, people started whispering immediately. Somebody snorted loud enough for everyone nearby to hear and said, "Damn, man couldn't even afford a clean shirt." Another guy muttered, "Smells like a lawnmower repair shop in here." Walter ignored all of it, but Rachel didn't. She leaned close while they sat at the defense table and whispered, "You could have worn the suit I bought you." Walter looked down at the grease stains on his sleeves and quietly replied, "This is the cleanest thing I own that's honest." Then Travis Mercer entered the courtroom. Perfect navy suit, silver cufflinks, smile polished for cameras. He paused just long enough near Walter's table to deliver one low sentence nobody else heard. "Last chance to settle. Before I bury you for good." Walter finally looked up at him, calm, expressionless, and for the first time all morning, Travis stopped smiling. By the time the judge entered, the entire courtroom had gone dead quiet. That strange kind of silence where you can actually feel people waiting for somebody's life to fall apart. Travis Mercer sat at the plaintiff's table looking relaxed, arms folded like a man already counting his victory money. His attorney, Glenn Foster, kept shuffling papers around with that smooth little grin expensive lawyers practice in mirrors. Walter just sat there beside Rachel with his old lunchbox resting near his boots, hands folded calmly like he was waiting for an oil change instead of a public execution. Judge Evelyn Harper adjusted her glasses and looked over the case file for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Boone, I understand you're representing yourself today?" Walter nodded once. Glenn Foster couldn't help himself. He chuckled under his breath and leaned back in his chair. Bold strategy. A few people in the gallery laughed quietly with him. Walter didn't react. Judge Harper noticed that. You could tell. Some people mistake silence for weakness. Smart people know better. The prosecution started first. Glenn walked the jury through glossy repair estimates, enlarged engine photos, charts full of mechanical jargon designed to confuse regular people. Every few minutes he glanced toward Walter with that fake sympathetic expression like he almost felt bad destroying him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said dramatically, "this is what happens when unqualified backyard mechanics tamper with vehicles they don't understand." Walter just listened. No interruptions. No angry outbursts. Nothing. And honestly, I think that unnerved them more than if he'd screamed. Then Glenn made his mistake. He pointed directly at Walter and said, "This man built his business on trust, but trust without professionalism is dangerous." That's when Walter finally stood up. Slow. Steady. The courtroom got quiet again immediately. Walter cleared his throat once and looked toward the judge. "Ma'am, I don't talk fancy, so I'll keep this simple." He rested one hand on the old lunchbox beside him. "I've worked on engines since I was 13 years old. Learned from my father before cancer took him. I've rebuilt tractors during snowstorms, fixed ambulances at 2 in the morning, and kept this town moving longer than some folks in here have been alive." Nobody laughed anymore. Walter looked over at the jury next. "Now maybe I don't wear expensive suits. Maybe my hands ain't clean, but I never lied to a customer. Not once." Then he opened the lunchbox, and that's when the room changed. Inside wasn't food. It was evidence. Walter pulled out printed screenshots first. Dozens of fake online reviews, all traced back to dealership employees and burner accounts connected to Velocity Automotive. Murmurs started spreading across the courtroom. Glenn Foster's smile faded a little. Then Walter held up Eli Benson's cracked cell phone. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to play a video." The footage rolled across the courtroom monitors. Grainy security camera angle. Timestamp visible. Dylan Mercer underneath the Aston Martin, loosening engine mounts himself, while another employee laughed behind the camera. Then Dylan's voice came through crystal clear. "Dad's gonna love this." You could actually hear somebody gasp behind me when the clip ended. Travis Mercer stopped moving entirely. Glenn Foster immediately jumped up, shouting objections. Chain of custody, illegal acquisition, all of it. But Judge Harper shut him down fast. "Sit down, Mr. Foster." Her tone changed completely after that. Sharper. Colder. Walter wasn't finished either. He calmly handed over signed witness statements from Rusty's Tavern. Multiple people confirming Dylan bragged publicly about destroying Boone's auto before the lawsuit was ever filed. Then came the final blow. Walter pulled a small digital recorder from the lunchbox and looked directly at Travis Mercer before pressing play. Static crackled for half a second. Then Travis's voice filled the courtroom. "Once this case hits the news, Boone's finished. Nobody trusts dirty mechanics with luxury cars. People see grease stains and assume guilty." Dead silence afterward. Pure dead silence. Travis looked like somebody had drained all the blood out of his body. Rachel actually covered her mouth because even she hadn't heard that recording before. Turns out Sheila from Rusty's had recorded the conversation accidentally during a private party event at the bar weeks earlier. Glenn Foster looked ready to disappear through the floor. Judge Harper removed her glasses slowly and stared at Travis for several seconds before speaking. "Mr. Mercer, is there any part of this evidence you claim is fabricated?" Travis opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because what exactly could he say at that point? That everyone else was lying except him? The jury deliberated less than 40 minutes. 40. That's all it took to destroy the reputation Travis Mercer spent years manufacturing. The verdict came back brutal. Fraud, defamation, malicious prosecution, civil conspiracy. Velocity Automotive ordered to pay massive damages plus legal costs. But honestly, the money wasn't the part people remembered afterward. It was what Judge Harper said right before ending the case. She looked directly at Walter Boone in front of everybody and said, "This court has seen many educated men with polished reputations and expensive credentials, but integrity does not come from appearances. And today, Mr. Boone, your character spoke louder than any attorney in this room." You could have heard a pin drop. Walter just nodded quietly like he didn't quite know what to do with praise. That's the thing about humble people. They never expect vindication to feel so heavy. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Walter immediately. Microphones everywhere, cameras flashing in his face. One reporter asked, "Mr. Boone, how does it feel proving everybody wrong?" Walter thought about it for a second. Then he gave the most Walter Boone answer possible. "Honestly, I wish it hadn't happened at all." That line ended up all over the internet by nightfall, but the moment people in Ash Creek still talk about happened after the cameras left. Walter was standing alone near the courthouse steps when a man in military uniform approached him quietly. Tall guy, maybe mid-30s, scar near his jaw. He looked nervous for some reason. "Mr. Boone?" Walter turned. The soldier smiled faintly. "About 8 years ago, you fixed my Jeep before my deployment overseas." Walter squinted for a second, trying to remember. The soldier laughed softly. "Transmission was shot. I couldn't afford the repair." Then his expression changed. "You told me to just come home safe someday." Walter's face softened immediately. "You made it back." The soldier nodded once. "Yeah, barely." Then he reached out and shook Walter's hand. Firm, respectful, real. And for the first time that entire day, Walter looked close to tears. Now here's the part people still argue about around Ash Creek. About 6 months after the trial, Velocity Automotive shut down completely. Travis Mercer disappeared out west somewhere. Some folks say he deserved every bit of it. Others think Walter should have settled quietly instead of destroying hundreds of dealership jobs in the fallout. And honestly, I don't know. Justice gets complicated once enough people are standing near the explosion. But I do know this. Boone's auto still sits behind that old bait shop near the railroad tracks. Same broken sign, same gravel parking lot. And every morning around 7:30, Walter Boone unlocks the garage wearing grease-stained coveralls that still smell like motor oil and hard work. So tell me something. If you'd been sitting in that courtroom that day, would you have judged Walter the same way everybody else did when he first walked in? Or would have you looked a little closer before deciding what kind of man he was? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this say a lot more about us than they do about him.